Today's guest is the co-founder of Harvey, an AI platform for lawyers, which he started 3 years ago and is now valued at over $5 billion.
I think we're on just like a massively compressed timeline, like all AI companies are. You gotta win the next deal, gotta win the next deal, gotta win the next deal.
In this episode, we talk about how Harvey scaled from 0 to 150 million in annual revenue with only 500 customers, the future of building application layer AI companies, and why Harvey started by selling to the biggest customers and law firms first.
I think that it's very important that you get distribution quickly. You switch to a mental model of how do we make it so that this user experience is as good as possible.
So how did this all start?
You made the active decision to go for the harder companies to close as a customer first. And it's helped you scale to 150 million in annual revenue. Why did you make that conscious decision? I talked to some of your investors that are like, this is a horrible idea. Don't do this.
But the reason we did this is, I think one of the most important things when you're going after one of these verticals is to actually like partner with the vertical. So I think that there's definitely two approaches. One approach is you say, hey, this vertical is traditional, conservative, outdated, and we're going to build everything in a lab in Silicon Valley, and then we're just going to, release it, and it's going to run over everything, right? I don't think that is the good way to build application layer companies right now. I think the better way is to actually really understand what are the incredibly important use cases of the industry, right? And that's from the product side. Like, where can you start? Where can you get broad adoption as quickly as possible, right? And maybe it isn't a depth of adoption, but you can actually get people to try to use this. And then the other thing, too, is I actually think it really matters that you understand what they care about in that industry, right? And so what this all comes back to is if you partner with the large firms like A&O Sherman and Latham and those folks, you start to get a sense for these are the different use cases that you can adopt. You kind of treat them like design partners on the product side. And you also get a sense for what's important. Right. And so in legal, accuracy is incredibly important.
Right.
Auditability is incredibly important. Security is very important. Our security team is much larger than the average AI company. I can tell you that in terms of ratios to the rest of the engineering org. And so, I think it's the combination of you want to partner with the industry. And in doing that, it helps you do two things. One is from the product side, it helps you get design partners and figure out what you want to build. And then it helps you from the branding and kind of cultural of how do you learn to respect this industry. Right. And that's something that's also interesting is like, how do you teach engineers? I'm serious. How do you teach engineers what lawyers do?
Right.
And even more importantly than that is, and again, that's the functional piece, is how do you help them respect what lawyers do?
Yeah.
And I remember one of the first things that we did, we were maybe like 30 people at the time, and we had a lot of lawyers. And we brought in a couple of the lawyers that had worked on the Take Dell private, which is an incredibly complex transaction, right? And I think having some of those attorneys stand up and say, yeah, this is how we decided what a tracking stock was. This is how we did X, Y, Z. The engineers in the audience start going from, oh, this is really hard, and this is really impressive, right? And at the end of the day, like, that's what you want to do to motivate folks is you want to make sure that they're working on really, really hard problems, and they need to understand that the industry is difficult.
Because you've talked about how just incredibly messy the industry is as well, and how difficult the workflows and all of those things are. Do you still... I read somewhere you force engineers as well to sit next to lawyers in those scenarios.
Okay, force is a strong word.
Encourage.
To
like see like, hey, this is actually not how someone would write this, or this argument's weak. We care a lot about these aspects of the workflow. Do you still, even at the scale you're at now, have that sort of collaborative sphere with your partners?
Yes, massively. And it's a lot more operationalized than it used to be at the beginning, right? In the beginning, it was kind of like, all right, here's some different titles for what we should do with lawyers. We should definitely have the lawyers like sit next to the engineers, and then things will kind of get absorbed. And you have a combination of, AI benchmarks and evaluations plus human in the loop evaluations. And it was kind of a mess. And we've definitely, I think, gotten a lot better at which pieces of the product do you involve the lawyers in, and which piece do you hand off to the engineers. And the answer to this question is actually all of the pieces, right? Like you need lawyers to help design the systems and figure out what are the use cases that people care about. And then you also need lawyers to evaluate the outputs. And I do think one thing we're starting to do more and more of is how do you actually create a bunch of systems for just doing automatic evals across the board, right? It's really hard to do when you have a general application, right? If it's like a general productivity platform, it's really hard to say, here are all the different use cases that a lawyer could ever use.
Right.
And then here's an evaluation set for that. That's really hard. What's easier is I've built a workflow, with a law firm or something like that, you upload target financials and acquirers financials, and it tells you in 75 countries whether, you can file for antitrust or if this is going to be, merger clearance issues, right? That you can actually get really good benchmarks for.
Right.
And so I think as you move closer and closer to we are trying to build a workflow that completes the task from start to finish, now you can get really good benchmarking.
Because it's so specific.
It's so specific, and you have context complete environments. In other words, you have a set of regulations. You have a set of facts that you are applying to those regulations, and that's a closed universe, right? If you have more, I would like to, find every single case that has ever said X, Y, Z, you don't have a closed universe. And so it's really hard to evaluate the success of that.
It seems logical now, but I imagine getting to that point, how do you even convince them that you're the right partner to be able to execute on that? Because right now you're there, you have the data, you've got the customers that you can work with, but at the beginning of that, take me to the start of that process.
Yeah. So the thing that I think we did well that was definitely, massively not scalable, was the nice thing is a lot of what lawyers do is publicly filed at the end. So the work product itself, the different processes of the work product, is not publicly available. But the artifact of kind of what they've completed at the end of a transaction, or at the end of any sort of filing, or at the end of a litigation, in other words, all the motions for summary judgment, things like that, all the case briefs, those are publicly available.
Right.
And so the thing that we did is we would jump on one of these demos, we'd look up the lawyer, and we'd try to find either one of the big deals that they had done, and then you go find the merger agreement online because it's a public deal. And you have Harvey basically analyze that merger agreement. Something, you ask some sort of question that it analyzes that merger agreement. And then they know what the answer is. And the other good thing about this, and this works really well with litigators, is you upload a case that they used to file. This was maybe the number one thing we did, an argument that they filed, right? A brief. And you would basically say, tell me, make holes in these arguments, and how would you argue against it? That's what you do. I'm serious. And it was a little contentious sometimes. And I actually remember we did this when we were doing one of our pitches to Sequoia, and it was with a lawyer on the call. And
you did it with one of her, or
one of the lawyers that they had brought on the call. And the interesting thing was, sometimes it can go wrong. The answer is wrong sometimes, right? And especially this is 2023, right? And so it was early days, but they pay attention. They pay attention. So, a lot of these products, it's just populating text.
Right.
And how do you get someone to pay attention to that? Well, you tell a litigator that there might be holes in this argument.
What?
And they go, but they want to prove you wrong.
Yeah.
Right. And so they really pay attention. And then if you're right, they really paid attention and the answer was right. And that's super impressive. And it's funny, that isn't how we do demos anymore. But that is kind of what we do to drive adoption still, in very scaled ways. So one of the things that we do is we will build a bunch of these workflows that will do, sometimes they're very complex. Sometimes they're more just chaining a bunch of prompts together, right? And what it does, though, is it allows these partners to basically click one button and it produces an output that is super helpful to them.
Right.
And so they don't have to prompt, they don't have to figure out how to use Gen AI tools or anything like that. You can just surface it. And we've actually done a lot of that. And that's really helped with onboarding. And so it's weird where it's that thing that didn't scale, we've actually productionized it.
Yeah.
And it still is something that is really helpful for getting, especially more senior partners engaged.
Right. So instead of having it be just at the sale point, you've sort of pulled it back one layer where it's hey, here's all the resources, how you can interact.
It's a deployment strategy, I think. And the cool thing about this is they start sharing them. And so one thing that we're releasing pretty soon is you can actually start sharing them with their clients clients. And so we work a lot with large firms, but we work, almost equally as much with large enterprises, right? Like private equity, large banks, telcos, et cetera. And a lot of what we hear from them is we want our law firms to help show us how to use AI. Yeah, a lot of that. And
Really?
so, yeah, tons of it.
Yeah.
And not necessarily in like I think some of it is like consulting, right? Like some of it is, can you help us come up with AI guidelines, right? Can you help review our data privacy, rules and code of conduct and stuff like that? I think some of it's that, but a lot of it also is just how are you getting value out of these tools? And if you've been using Harvey for a while and you're one of these firms, you've created all these different workflows.
Right.
And you can take one of those workflows and populate it into, a different customer's instance. And now, so when that customer logs into Harvey, they have a workflow that's created by their law firm specifically for them.
Yeah.
And then they click on that button and there's no prompting or anything, and it just does this beautiful output.
Yeah.
And I think that's been super effective. And I would say all of those things are kind of very similar to what we did in the beginning.
Just that's interesting. Well, I would say it's very similar.
Similar.
You're getting a single customer in the lawyer on their team and showing them one of these workflows.
Well, and then they try everything else.
Yeah.
So, I mean, what's interesting is our DAU over MAU for folks that have used one product feature, right, is about half what it is for people that have used like 3 to 4.
Okay.
And our DAU over MAU for people that have used 3 to 4 is close to like Slack level, right?
Which is insane.
Slack or email.
Yeah.
It's crazy high. But the problem is, how do you get folks to actually discover all the different use cases?
Yeah.
And a lot of what we're working on is actually how do you use the ability of the models to orchestrate things, right? To do that. And you can kind of think of this as like a tool use problem, where you can start mapping, you can build all these different workflows and these different databases of knowledge. And you can basically make it so based off of the user's query, it routes you to the part of the product that is most helpful for answering that. And so you don't have to have this massive GUI with like, I have to search here and here and here and here and attach the right documents and everything like that. We want to move to a universe where you just type in natural language. And then in the same way that, if you're using ChatGPT, it'll route you to a different model. We route you to a different part of the platform, right? And eventually we have a Word plugin. And if you start drafting something, it will go into draft mode. And then it will route you to Word if you want to go use it in Word, right? And that's the kind of like type of ecosystem we're trying to do, where it's just you meet the users where they are. They are using natural language, but it routes them to a better UI based off of whatever their task is.
That's super interesting. What are your thoughts then on it sounds kind of like product-led growth, but then what you guys have done in the early days especially is you mentioned like super non-scalable. Like what's the balance of let's do something super non-scalable and figure out a way to integrate it into the product? Is that sort of how you think about it, or?
Yeah, I think a lot of it is kind of, you have to get to a critical mass of unlocking the market to get to, I think, the product-led growth, if that makes sense. So I actually think our strongest product-led growth that we've had is external virality, not just internal virality. So I think internal virality has been very strong, but at this point, most law firms, when they purchase us, they purchase it for the entire law firm, and they roll it out all at once. Which in the beginning, we did the first one of that when we had 3 people, and it was like 4,000 users, and that was a nightmare. But now it's like we're doing really well with that. We've done a bunch of them. But with the thing where I think actually you have a lot of product-led growth right now is you have law firms saying, hey, we were using Harvey for this, and they bring it to their private equity client. And they say, hey, did you know, like, this is what we're doing with AI to help you automate fund formation. And we're building some of this stuff ourselves. We're building some of it on Harvey, et cetera. And then the private equity fund goes, oh, I'd also like to use Harvey. Can we collaborate in the system together? And you get the internal virality of, you have a partner that tries something and then they're sitting next to another, junior associate, and they use it that way. But then I think even more powerfully, you get the external virality, which is, how do you make it so that, you are the system that is helping the industry, the legal industry, not just law firms, not just in-house, solve this problem and adopt AI at scale.
How have you gone about that? That's like such a huge part of the stack
Yeah.
you're trying to provide value for? How have you gone about systematically or like stepwise going through and actually providing that? Because I imagine if you started off at the very beginning saying, hey, we're going to help private equity, we're going to help the lawyers, we're going to do everything.
Yeah, it's hard. I mean, I think like it's crazy. I mean, I think everyone says this, but at some point, the biggest problem it feels like with every company is just like, how do you do internal scaling? And how do you do prioritization, right? And I think it's a work in progress for us. And what we find is we have like a different types of personas. We have folks that are kind of like innovation teams, right? And those are folks that are, driving forward innovation at law firms. You have the lawyers at the law firms,
right?
And then you have in-house lawyers. Right. And those are kind of our three different personas. There's different types in each one. Asset managers think about things differently than banks. Banks think about things different than a large retail provider who thinks about it differently than a telco. But it's somewhat the same. And the thing that we're starting to do more recently is how do we break up our teams and our product so that there is an underlying platform for all of these things. And then there is basically, what does the product look like for law firms? What does the product look like for in-house?
Right.
And then what are the admin features for law firms and what are the admin features for in-house, right? And we are just starting to do this. We're just starting to go on this journey. And the problem with not doing it earlier is we would have like the users would be really happy. Like the lawyers would be really happy because we focused a quarter on just users and just making DAU over MAU go up, hours spent in the platform go up. That's all we focused on. Well, then we would get behind in the admin features, right? Or the innovation features or the customization features and stuff like that. And we'd say, oh no, we haven't paid enough attention to this. We got to go focus on that, right? And then we'd be like, oh, well, we just landed a bunch of different in-house teams. And we're kind of behind on some of the features right? And so what we've now started to do is actually just break these all out. And I think the most difficult thing for us is going to be just hyper-discipline on what are the most important features for law firms, what are the most important features for in-house, and hopefully what are the things in the middle that we can make really good. And that's like net new. Like, a lot of what we're building for law firms and a lot of what we're building for in-house is how do you aggregate all of these different data sets, tool usage, all of these different things into one platform. It's definitely net new. But I think the more interesting thing over time is if you create a very good system for how legal services are delivered, right? And that's basically just collaboration. That middle zone is, I think, where we'll see the most innovation long term.
Why?
I think that the advent of Gen AI getting this good is just going to fundamentally change how you practice law. I'm serious. I think it will.
Yeah.
I don't think it's going to do it tomorrow. And I think it's actually much slower than a lot of the media says it is. And again, this is why we focus on so much of integrating with these legacy systems like Alexis or the Microsoft Suite. Lawyers love the Microsoft Suite. Everyone is in the Microsoft Suite.
That's going to be painful.
I don't know. It can be good and bad. I mean, I will say that it is incredible, the staying power of Word.
Yeah.
Just incredible.
Yeah.
And you do get really used to it. And I think Excel had its 40th anniversary recently or something.
Yeah.
And a bunch of people were posting about ode to Excel, it still works. These tools work and people like them and they get used to them and they do their whole career in them. And so you have to respect that. And you have to integrate with them and meet them where they are. But my point is, I think that a lot of the tools that just a lawyer uses day to day is going to change how they practice. But I don't think that's going to change how much legal services are delivered as much as are there different ways to actually deliver services to clients. Right. And so what I mean by this is you might get to a point where there is a law firm that has done fund formation for a private equity fund 20 times, 30 times. And you might end up in a situation where they actually have a AI fund formation platform that they have developed in Harvey. And that helps them speed up fund formation by X amount, right? That helps them look at all the historical data of when they've worked on this before with the private equity fund and make it so it's much higher performance, right? that I think will fundamentally change this industry much more than just how lawyers are using these tools day to day.
Right. Is that also why you're putting so much emphasis on just like deeply integrating with those lawyers to make sure that their service can be delivered better instead of just replacing them?
Exactly. That's the exact point. And I think the other thing too is the problem, like one of the largest problems with law, and I think hopefully like my team, I think, really understands this, and especially the engineers, and part of it is having, look at the Dell take private, is if you have just agentic systems that are kind of going off and doing a bunch of tasks, it's really hard to audit those systems. And they don't have access to all of the disparate data sets. Like the reality is, for just a litigation, you need maybe like 19 different integrations with legacy tools. I'm serious. Plus, an incredible amount of internal documents from the corporation or et cetera, to actually get to a point where you have a context complete environment.
Right.
And what I mean by context complete is you can query that environment and it will give you an answer based off of everything that is relevant to that litigation, right? If you don't get there, your answer is always wrong. Like in some way, shape, or form, your answer is always wrong.
Yeah.
And I think we talk a lot about hallucinations. A lot of hallucinations, or a lot of what folks are referring to here, is actually just the model has like no context on these things, right? And it improves, and the users get better and better at knowing like, oh, I need to communicate with this system the same way that I would communicate with a colleague, right? But it's really hard to communicate with a colleague. I mean, the amount of times that someone asks me to do something or I ask them to do something and I'm like busy and I just don't think about, oh, actually I meant this database and like this and this and this and this and this, is like 90% of the time. And so I think it's a really hard problem. And you have to, instead of forcing the user to solve that problem, putting the onus on them, how do you create a system where it's already set? All the context is already there. It's complete.
Right. Yeah. I love that it's actually quite a lazy way to go about it. It's like, hey, let's have the user figure it out. Like it can do it, but they're going to have to upload all of these files. They're going to have to say in what order it needs to be read, or
exactly, and say, this is the one that was edited recently by outside counsel, or I mean, another way to think about this of how much you have to get to context complete here, you need emails eventually, right? You need client correspondence, right? Because a lot of the preferences of clients is they aren't shown in a document. They come up from a call, and there's notes on that from that call, or it's in an email or something like that.
Right.
And so I think that in order to make the best user experience, you eventually do have to collapse all this information into one spot, so that your systems, call them agents, call them whatever you want, can actually go out and take the correct information and give you an answer based off of all the information it needs.
Yeah.
Right.
Is that part of what you guys are working on the most at the moment? Is actually how do we not just pull in all of that information, but actually make sure that your software and the workflows pull in the right types of information?
That's exactly what, like, I would say that is the number, like the two things that we're working the most on is how do you get to context complete for a task, which is what we just said, which is how do you get all of the relevant information, whether that's through integrations, whether that's through your own product, whether that's because you made a really nice, easy way for the customer to upload that, whether it's stored in your own product.
Right.
How do you get all the correct context for whatever the user's needs are?
Right.
Preemptively.
Yeah.
Right? Preemptively.
Yeah.
That I think is one. The second thing that we're working on is just multiplayer, like as simple as possible, right? Like how do you make a really good system for the law firms and their corporates to actually work together on these things? And that's going to be a multi-year problem, would be my guess. And I think what's interesting is everyone is kind of, my guess is the theme of next year is just multiplayer. Like everyone is starting to release these type of features. Like the hyperscalers are doing this, OpenAI is doing this, everyone's doing this. And my bet is the way that you do collaboration in a vertical is so different than the general way of collaborating, that you can build a really strong moat just in building the right multiplayer product for that particular vertical.
Right. And is that also would an example of that be integrating with Word, integrating deeply with Excel?
Course. Yeah.
Okay. So just making sure that you're meeting the customers where they are.
Exactly. And eventually I don't think you just have to have like a sprawling mess of integrations. Like some of this stuff you can rebuild.
Yeah.
But it takes time. And I don't think there's a reason to go and try to rebuild the entire Office suite or something like that. That doesn't really make tons of sense.
Right.
Yeah.
Which is interesting because a lot of startups are trying to do that. Like, hey, let's
Correct.
replace Excel. It's like,
of course.
well, let's figure out first how, what you guys are doing is you're looking at how Excel or how Word are being used in a very specific vertical and then just making that use case better instead of trying to redevelop the whole platform.
Exactly. And there's some things like we obviously have like a document editor in our own platform.
Right.
And there's some things that our document editor can do that Word cannot, right? But you want to make that as seamless as possible. You want to make it so that, if you want to edit the doc in our editor, you can do that. If you want to add different data sets, you probably have to use our editor. Yeah. But then you want to add those data sets, do like some retrieval on top of it and compare, I don't know, Lexis data to a document, right? Like apply all the case law to an employment contract or something. But then you actually want to go and like edit it in traditional Word.
Yeah.
And so you just click a button and you go to Word.
Yeah. Making it easier to actually meet them where they are.
Exactly.
It's interesting because you've talked a lot about, in the early days, I know for Harvey, citation was really important, and that's sort of something that's...
The Biography podcast is presented by Row, the all-in-one banking platform for startups. Thousands of startups like Perplexity, Product Hunt, and more use Row. You get everything you need to manage your startup's cash. Fast banking setup, cards with up to 2% cash back, and yield that turns company cash into extra runway. All super important in the early days of launching. But the thing founders really love about Row is their team. They are obsessed with helping founders disrupt the status quo and will go to the end of the earth to help them to do so. And exclusively for Biography podcast listeners and viewers, you'll get a $1,500 statement credit plus a ton of exclusive perks when you manage your company's cash with Row. To learn more, visit rho.co/biography. Terms and conditions apply. Row is a fintech, not a bank. Checking and card services are provided by Webster Bank, member FDIC. See rewards terms for details.
How over time have you changed the way you sell the product? With all of these different use cases, with all of these different components, how has that changed as a product has sort of expanded?
Yeah, so I'll say like accuracy is still incredibly important.
Okay.
The problem is with accuracy and what we were talking about earlier is it's hard to do general accuracy. Yeah. Like I don't know if there is a clear way to say what is the accuracy of ChatGPT. That seems impossible, right? And again, to what we were talking about, like part of the accuracy problems could be the context isn't there, right? Like if you don't have case law and you ask a bunch of questions about case law,
I don't know what you're talking about.
Is it inaccurate or accurate? Well, you didn't give it the case law, so it's kind of neither here nor there. So I think accuracy is incredibly important. The other thing that I think is becoming a really strong selling point is how many different like specific workflows you can do. And I think we are moving away from this is, a chat interface to the chat interface is like a portal basically. Like you just use that to get to all of the other parts of the product, right? Like that is, I think, what this is becoming where, you type in, I want to analyze these two companies for like merger control guidelines, and it'll just route you to this workflow that does merger control guidelines.
That's beautiful.
But you don't have to click merger control guidelines or like find it in the plethora of things. Right. It's similar to, again, like a model call to basically, GPT-5 versus, a reasoning model or whatever. It's the same thing, except for you're doing a different part of your product.
Right.
And so it's a really good way to just do like discovery, like make it so your users are discovering different parts of your product. We call them nudges, and I kind of like that.
Yeah.
But because it's not forced. So like the best example of this is if you type a case law question in our product, it will say, hey, this seems like a case law question. Would you like to use Lexis data, or would you like to use like web browsing and go check these different like secondary sources on something, right? And so you do it that way. You don't like do it behind the scenes. You make it so it's like, hey, did you mean this?
Right.
Hey, did you want to upload this document? Hey, did you want to try these workflows?
Yeah.
Right. And I think that's a much better user experience.
Yeah. And then you actually get more accuracy, hopefully, as well, because you're
Way
involving
more.
the user in, hey, what do I actually need to pull for you?
Oh, exactly. You're setting them up so it's like they have to upload that correct document, right? And you're trying to answer this question. You don't want to get rid of the flexibility. Like you still want people, you run one of those workflows And the next thing that happens is it opens draft mode.
Right.
And you can go change the output.
Yeah.
And then you can go put it in Word,
Yeah.
right? So you don't want to make everything on Rails.
Yeah.
But I think that if you leave everything to, we have an assistant product, we're going to improve the model, and it's just the outputs are going to get better over time, that is not as useful to people as there are these different product suites and a part of your platform. And each part of your product surface or your suite, et cetera, can solve a different pain point. How do you make it so that what the models are actually doing in a lot of the instances is just routing you to the solve for your pain point?
Interesting. So would you say then you're trying to front load more of the work before delivering on the actual AI part of it?
100%. That's what you're trying to do. And I mean, or you can think of it as you're narrowing the AI problem. That's maybe closer, is you're basically taking like an aggregation of all the different types of queries.
Yep.
And you're improving the performance to solving one of, and you think of a query as a user's problem.
Yeah.
Yeah, seriously.
That's
You
all it
think
is,
of-
actually.
You can literally just think of every single query as a user's problem.
Right.
And what you're trying to do is build a platform that can cover the highest like ground of all the users' problems. That's what you're trying to do, right? And so you the way that you do that is you basically expand the platform. You expand all the use cases. You add more data. You add more integrations. You add collaboration because maybe the data is with their client, someone else. You add all these different surface areas, and then you collapse the UI right back.
Right.
And you add all these surface areas, and you collapse the UI right back.
Right. And is that something you have been you're doing right now? Is it consistently something you're doing when you're improving the product? Like, hey, fuck a roadmap.
We're not quite there. But yeah.
Let's just keep expanding whenever. Like, how have you gone about? Because it seems so hard to do that early on.
Yeah.
How have you gone about collapsing and expanding that surface area?
Yeah, so the nice thing, it's absolute freaking chaos in the beginning.
Okay.
I think we now have maybe like a taxonomy of, there are like 10 general types of problems that people are trying to solve, whether it's a drafting problem, whether it's a document comparison problem, whether it's a research problem,
Right.
whether it is a, extracting tons of information from millions of documents at once problem.
Yeah.
You can just think of actually the universe of like categories of problems isn't that high. The problem is, how many different types of documents do you want to draft? Right? Like drafting is like, okay, great. But it's like, how many different type of legal documents are there? Wow, a lot. Right? And so what's helped is we have an idea of basically what the different broad areas are. And then you just improve the product and add different use cases into those broad areas, which makes it easier.
Right.
Yeah.
That makes a lot more sense.
Yeah.
Switching the pace a little bit to your role as a founder, and we've talked a lot about you need to keep expanding the product to actually solve the user's problems, and you've talked about expanding and contracting what the actual product does. A lot of what we've been talking about sort of revolves around speed.
Yeah.
Not just of the product itself in terms of being able to deliver on the problems or the queries that the users have, but also on you guys actually being able to build out these capabilities. Can you talk to me a little bit about speed and how you guys are actually thinking about building the product?
Yeah. So the most important part of speed, I think in vertical for sure, is speed to basically prototype. And the reason why is so you can kind of think of like the different problems that you have in verticals.
Yeah.
The two main problems you have are, one, your actual, like the people building the product, a lot of the times don't have like perfect context of what the users are doing, right? Like if you're building Cursor, it's like the engineers have a pretty good sense of like how people are using it, right? Ours is a little bit harder, right? If you're building something that like automates disclosure schedules in M&A, it's like you kind of got to explain like, is that working or not? Things like that. The second problem is just how important security is in our area, like so important. And so what's nice is if you can quickly prototype, you can basically get it into the hands of like alpha testers who are super trusted by us, and they can test these things really, really fast, right? And then you just iterate. And then you probably have to take actually a decent amount of time before you GA it. And the reason why is there's just so many different security concerns.
Right.
And so one area where this is coming up massively is, we're trying to build a lot of like multiplayer into our product. And the reality is some of the things that we're doing is a little bit slower because you have to basically have both parties go through like a security review in order to share confidential data between each other. This is like an actually like very difficult problem, right? And it's interesting where it's like Microsoft is a good example of they're also doing a lot of multiplayer. They have one problem. Their problem is inside an organization. How do you get the permissions right? How do you get sharing right internally?
Yeah.
We have that problem. But then a second problem, which is how do you share that data now with external parties?
Right.
And how do you do collaboration and multiplayer with external parties?
Right. And who even at that party?
Exactly. Right. Oh, 100%. And for law, there's something called ethical walls. And how this works is basically, if you're a law firm, you're going to be representing competitors. That happens all the time, right? So if you're a law firm and you work in private equity, you're going to be working with, you don't work with one private equity fund, right? Like you're working
with a very
with
small firm.
Yeah, you're working with like 10, 20, right? Hundreds maybe. And because of that, it's really, really important that the lawyer that is working on, private equity fund 1 is not working on, also their competitor in some sort of similar or adjacent deal.
Yeah.
And so there's something called ethical walls, and it happens basically in a client engagement. There's just a rule of like, these are the people that are allowed to work on this, and you can't share this data with anybody else, right? And that's going to be a problem internally, right? Inside a firm. It's going to be a huge problem as well of how do you actually do that between the private equity fund and the law firm? Yeah. So it's a huge security problem.
Is that also a situation where you're sort of, I don't want to say compromising, but balancing speed and quality?
Yes.
Is that another scenario where for multiplayer, you guys are iterating fast until you go wide?
That's basically, so for multiplayer, we basically have spent way more time thinking about how to do the security, how to do the permissioning and things like that.
Yeah.
Whereas for everything else, you kind of could just like build that feature and like ship it.
Yeah.
But for this, I think if we do it wrong, not only is it going to have an impact on us, it's going to have an impact on the industry.
Yeah.
Because, I think right now, actually, Gen AI adoption is going really fast through law firms. At least we see it. And for in-house, the number one way to tank that is security breach. Like that is the number one way for the entire industry to tank this. Yeah, exactly. And so I think we're taking a little bit of a slower approach for that particular area. But it's just a weird thing where it's like you have to move really fast, but you can't break things. And so it's a weird balance to strike.
Yeah, 100%. It's there's a great interview with Kareem, the CTO of Ramp, and he's talked about the same things. Like if you're handling people's money, it's like you don't want things to go wrong there, but like on some of the UI stuff, maybe you can go faster.
Yeah, you can go faster, and it's exactly the same thing. And some of the like fundamental infrastructure around permissionings and things like that have to be super important.
Yeah.
But then like the front end design and things like that, you can move much faster on.
Yeah, 100%. I want to pivot a little bit to talking about culture and the aspect of going fast and how you've actually built a team ready to do that. I talked to a couple of your investors and people who work at Harvey. And
great.
The one word that they all used to describe you was like relentless.
Okay.
And I love that. And I think I would actually add something as well, which is like caring in terms of like caring about the final product. You talked about, we actually need this to be secure. It just doesn't need to be quick and fast. How can you tell me a little bit about how you've built the team over the last couple of years to be able to tackle those problems quickly without compromising quality?
Yeah, I would say that the biggest thing I think we have done well is just how much we communicate with customers. And I think like we definitely have problems of sometimes you oscillate between those like 3 personas, right? If you spend too much time on one of them and you spend too much time on the other.
Yep.
But the amount that our product team actually talks to customers is very, very high. And so I think that's one of it is like you can just develop customer empathy really fast if like our product folks actually have like personal relationships with the customers that they have built over time, trust. That I think is the thing that we've done externally to move really, really fast and to get everyone to care, right? The thing internally I think we've done is we have definitely given folks a lot more kind of control over their own destiny or agency than I think a lot of startups have done in the past. In other words, I think we've been pressured a lot from early days to hire more like senior folks to run certain parts of the org. And we have also done that, and our leadership team is fantastic. But we also have really taken a massive bet on junior talent. And I think if you do that, there's pros and cons. The con to that is I think people mess up more. It's just how it happens.
Right.
The pro to that is people learn so much faster. They learn so much faster. And I think that if you are learning on the job, the reality is you care more. I think there are two different ways for people to really, really care about their careers. One is they care a lot about what they're doing. Right. And that's really important. And you have to have that. Individually, both of these are necessary, but not sufficient. You need both. One is you really have to care about what you're doing and the mission of the company.
Right.
The second thing is you need to feel ownership. Right? It's not enough for just the mission of the company is something you really, really love. You need to feel like you're part of that mission. And if you never give people the opportunity to fail, they don't feel like they have any impact at all. Right? And so I think that putting people in positions that they've never been in before, and giving them teams they've never managed before, whether that works or doesn't, I actually don't think it matters. Because at the end of the day, hopefully we learn from these things, and that person is just going to get way better over time, and also they're going to care a lot more.
Yeah.
And we've definitely had situations where we've had junior folks that have really done an incredible job, and scaled to a degree that they have never scaled in their past. And then we also have brought in a leader over them. And those transitions have so far always been good.
Right.
Always. And the reason I think they've been good is because that person has developed so much care for the company.
Right.
And they think of that leadership role as, I can learn from this person. It's not, that person is above me now and I don't get to have agency anymore. Yeah. It's, wow, I reached a scaling point.
Yeah.
And because we wait so long to hire senior leadership, the person we hire is usually 2 to 3 tiers above the scaling that we need, to be honest.
Yeah.
And I do that on purpose because I think the people under them have more room to grow. And I don't want this to be you bring that person in and the other person gets smushed.
And it gets capped.
And they just get capped out.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because I think that at that point, it's that person shouldn't be at the company.
Yeah.
Right? Seriously.
Yeah.
I think it's much better to really, really nurture that talent and bet on them to get to whatever degree they can, and then hire somebody that they see as a mentor, so that they're still going up.
Yeah, still within the company as well. They care so much, and they're provided the opportunity.
And they care so much. And the only thing that I think has ever given me any sort of peace from constantly being on is feeling that other members of the team have my back. And I don't mean have my back personally. I mean, have my back in the sense of I make mistakes all the time.
Yeah.
And if I can make a mistake and admit I made a mistake and the whole team rallies behind me because they really care, that is the only time as a founder you don't feel alone.
Yeah.
That is when you feel even if we don't fix the mistake perfectly, that is the only time that you really feel supported. And it reduces your anxiety. It reduces everything so much. That's, I think, where companies get massive confidence. It's not just, the founder made the right decision again and again and again. It's when the founder makes the wrong decision, which happens. Hopefully everyone admits that. We'll see. I don't know. You feel like people are going to be there and say, I really care about this company. It was a big mistake. We got this.
We're going
to figure it out together.
Yeah.
Instead of just kind of all right, you got to do the whole thing.
Yeah. Or I'm out. I don't care enough to actually.
Or I don't care enough. Yeah. And I think the flip side of that is, I think that we're definitely an intense company. And sometimes we can be a thrashy company.
Okay.
And I think that thrash, it comes from people really care. And so we're pretty perfectionist. And so, if a competitor releases something before us and they did something that's slightly better than us, which happens, that happens. I think that we do 10 times what is probably necessary to respond to that.
Yeah.
I think that's served us well.
Yeah.
Because I think that a lot of our current competitors are not necessarily who we're going to have to compete with long term. And I almost think that if you can learn that muscle and if you can really just have such insane, relentlessly high standards,
Yeah.
you are preparing yourself for a bigger competition
Right.
down the road.
Right. You're not limiting yourself based on that's super
Right.
interesting. There's so many ways we could go with this. I want to pull back a little bit from the competitive stuff, although we'll get there. I talked to some of your team members, and they talk about this like jobs not finished culture.
Yeah.
Like the Kobe.
Yeah.
I'll have to put it into the podcast.
Yeah.
It's a great clip.
It is very good.
I think that goes to show exactly what you just talked about. Like, hey, there's room for failure. Like, we're making the opportunity to fail, but we're not going to like seek. We're not going to criticize or like. We all have this collective understanding. We care so much. The job's never finished. Like, we're going to keep iterating on the product. I just thought I'd mention that because I think that's a really interesting aspect of the culture.
I think it's incredibly important of our culture. And I think the reason why that one actually of all of our kind of like culture tenets is the one that gets repeated the most. And I think the reality is, by a lot of measures we've done well so far. I think if you ask the team, do we all feel like we've done well and like we can like rest on our laurels? No one feels that way, hopefully. And I think just because what we're aspiring to do is so much higher.
Yeah.
And I think that like one thing I say to the team a lot is I think we're on just like a massively compressed timeline.
Yeah.
Like all AI companies are, where the type of work that you put in now for the next 5-10 years is going to just compound to such a degree in the next 20, 30, 40, 50 years that I hope that we have enough people that have that mentality, that we're okay with making a lot of sacrifice right now, because we know that there is a liftoff of compounding dedication that comes in the next like couple of years.
Yeah. That's interesting. Talk to me then about those next couple of years.
Yeah.
On that long term, because you just mentioned long term, you don't think you're gonna have the same set of competitors. Why do you think that?
Yeah, I guess like the best way to say this is I think that all application layer companies, they are in a race to make sure that they can provide significantly more value than the model providers. Right. And, you see model providers go after more and more verticals, but they don't even need to go after the vertical that we are in, like in legal tax, these other areas. Just the model quality is getting so much better. And you need to make sure that your product, in order to have any sort of pricing power or value capture or anything like that, is significantly better than whatever they can get from a model provider.
Right.
Significantly, right? And, right now, maybe that doesn't matter as much. But if you think about the stuff that we're trying to build, we're trying to build things that, can automate the first 10% of an M&A or something like that, right? You have this massive collaborative workspace, you spin it up and you put all the M&A documents in there, and, Harvey actually goes through and does a lot of the pre-processing of the documents and things like that, and then invites everyone in to go edit and make sure that everything's right and audit it, et cetera, and then give advice to the client afterwards. And I think that it's a race to do that. And I think that if you can't make sure that you are sequencing your product correctly to get to the point where you have a very strong moat against these models just getting better, you lose. And, I think historically, a lot of the product has been, you've heard people say wrappers, et cetera. And a lot of it, the models are doing a lot of the work. And I'd say, a year and a half ago, the models were doing a lot of the work in Harvey. Now we have so many different features and integrations and AI quality and all of these other things that make it significantly different than what you get. And even simple things like, one of the problems that we're going to run into over time is just how do you scale massive doc processing at scale, right? So how do you, in that M&A example, how do you go through 1 million contracts and create a diligence memo that goes through and it's 200 pages and it accurately cites to every single change of control provision and all these different things, right? You're going to, sure, there's probably some different types of latency expectancy for something that complex. It's still going to matter. And it's like, how can you accurately process all those documents in the way that the law firm wants it to be processed, right? And so over time, my only point with all of this is I think that if you are structuring your company so that you're just thinking about what are my competitors doing today and not what are the models going to look like tomorrow, you're in trouble.
Right.
And I think you need to do both. You need to balance both of them.
Yeah.
And sometimes that's cutting things that might be nice and easy to do now. It might get you some value because long term it's not a differentiator.
Can you provide an example of one of those things you might have cut or?
Yeah, I mean, so I'll give you an example of this. I think like working when you were saying before, we went after the large firms first and like large corporations. I think that a lot of the product features that you would be selling to, downstream kind of like SMB and things like that, ChatGPT is pretty good, right? And for a lot of those use cases, what you normally deal with is you analyze leases that are 3 pages.
Right.
It's kind of done.
Yeah.
Right? Like it's kind of over,
Yeah.
right? Like these tools can already just do this out of the box,
Yeah.
right? And so it's less like here are the different product features. It's more what is the complexity of the work that you're trying to go after, right? And I think that like the thing that makes me feel better is if you get to the point where, GPT-7, you type in, please merge, and you're doing literally the Activision merger, right? Like Microsoft and Activision merger. And you just go, please merge, smiley face, thank you. And it just does it.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, we're probably done.
Yeah.
But I'd also say like pretty much every other company on earth is done.
Yeah.
Probably. So let's figure out how to work our way up to building a system that helps lawyers do the Activision merger.
Right.
Right? That is the type of work that I think is going to be incredibly defensible in a product over time.
Right.
So let's focus on that.
Right. And that's also why in the beginning and even now you're going after what are the biggest, most complex workflows or
Yes.
situations, because that's
Exactly.
actually where the value and moat is.
Yes, and where the incentive structure aligns.
Okay.
So an example of this is like I really like M&A and fund formation. Those are 2 areas that we do a lot of like customization with, and we work with private equity funds on those things too. And I like those 2 areas because, it's like 50% of deals fall apart because of speed. Like they just
Really?
are too slow.
Okay.
Yeah. And so now you're not talking about efficiency. Like the reality is for some of these, like, a massive merger that's going to change the company, do people care what their legal fees are for it? Yes and no. But they really care about the performance.
Right.
They care about speed. They care about structuring that deal correctly.
Right.
Like that they really care about. They care about how the change management, how the org looks afterwards. And so I like going after use cases like that long term because I want to create a system that is actually giving a lot more benefits to users than just efficiency. And I think efficiency is great and hours saved is great and things like that. But if you can go to like, oh yeah, we, close this many contracts faster, or we bought this company when we normally would have been able to because the legal costs were prohibitive.
Yeah.
Or we looked at 50 companies to buy this year, and normally we look at 10.
Yeah.
And because we looked at 50, we found the right one, right? That's the type of story that I would like to be able to tell in the next couple of years, is those stories.
Yeah.
Instead of just, we save 10 to 15 hours a week on XYZ, which is great, and that's awesome. I'm not saying that's bad. I'm just saying I want the AI industry to look at more stuff than just like hours saved and efficiency, because I think there's so much we can do in legal and professional services that actually just make the service better. That isn't just, oh, we save time on this.
Right.
Yeah.
And it also goes back to what you said about incentives. A lawyer
Yes.
might not only be incentivized just to become cheaper.
Yeah, totally. And my argument would be, if you look at the areas like M&A, fund formation, et cetera,
Yeah.
the goal there is actually just get the best result,
Yeah.
right? And same with litigation, like bet the company litigation.
Yeah.
The goal is get the best result. And so at that point, if they can do stuff faster, well, they're going to file more briefs.
Yeah.
And that's a higher chance of winning the litigation. And if they can do that, they might be able to charge more. Like I would argue you could almost charge more for
Right.
that, right? You could charge more if you can do an M&A in 2 weeks and get you all the diligence instead of 6 weeks.
Yeah.
And in that time, there's a counter bid that comes in and they swoop the company from you.
Yeah.
I pay more.
Yeah.
Right?
Actually, yeah.
Seriously, I pay more.
Yeah.
And so that's the stuff that I think gets really interesting, where it's just the incentive alignment actually makes sense because it's a performance problem.
Yeah.
It's not just an efficiency problem.
Is that something you've been thinking about since you started Harvey in terms of like focusing on the performance problems instead of just efficiency?
I think more so the past like 2 years.
Okay.
I don't know if I was thinking about it tons the first year, but I think about it constantly now. And I think about it now because we're transitioning more and more to like, here's a platform, here's all these use cases, to you have that, but you also have, I want to spin up a merger.
Yeah.
And how do you take, again, going back to the context complete problem, how do you take all of the information that's relevant to a merger, put them into the same system, and then make it multiplayer and have people collaborate on doing that merger? And that's where I start to say, oh, this is going to hopefully change for the better a lot of how we do this work. Not, oh, great, like my billable hours are going to, get shaved off by X amount.
Yeah. That's super interesting. How have you gone about steering? Because I mean, you're steering a ship yourself, right? Like you're running a company. How do you go about pushing people or just having the company go in the right direction when you're making those big bets or those decisions? Because I talked to Katie from your team, and when she joined, she said, okay, here's a 3-year plan. And you're like, 3-year plan? Like, we don't know what's going to happen in 3 years with AI companies.
I don't know. It might be AGI, man. I don't know what's going on.
But you still have to make decisions and bets on where you think the puck is going. And so how do you go about like my question is basically, how do you go about changing the company to focus on one of those?
Yeah. So the first thing I will say is you have to be very confident in like long term. And like I'll give you an example of a long term bet. I feel very strongly that multiplayer is going to be very important. I think that there is no universe in which the largest change that happens to professional services is how enterprises work with their law firms and law firms work with their enterprises. Not just how things are done internally at these places, but how they work together.
Right.
So that you can say, that I believe in, fundamentally, we're going to focus on that.
Yep.
The sequencing to get to that, I'm wrong all the time. And I think like what you have to do, and this actually happened recently, where I kind of laid out, okay, I think we should do this. This is the end state of the product we're going to build, right? And these are the 3 most important categories of building this product. We're going to focus on 1, 2, and then 3. I realized when we showed it to a bunch of folks, we have to start with 3. Like we have to. And I was wrong. And in the memo I wrote to the entire team, it was basically, this is what I feel like long-term, this is the high-level vision, and here's the sequencing. Turned out I was wrong. Like, I thought the sequencing was 1, 2, 3, and it's actually 3, 1, 2. And you just have to admit that. You have to go back to the team and say, hey, look, like, we're 2 weeks into building this, and I think we sequenced this wrong. I think we should have probably done a little bit more customer work beforehand, and I think we sequenced it wrong. It's okay. The main vision is still there. Still feel very strongly about the main vision, but we're going to have to resequence this, and we're going to have to put some resources into this that were allocated somewhere else. And you just have to build that muscle as a company.
The muscle to be able to say, hey, this is wrong. We need to sequence it differently.
And I think like the reality is, you can come up with what is the roadmap going to be for 6 years, 10 years, et cetera. I don't think you can come up with the sequencing. You can come up with the broad strokes of the sequencing. Like, I think we knew that we had to go law firm first. You couldn't start with corporations for a plethora of reasons. But I think one is law firms' needs are somewhat similar sometimes to large corporations because they serve those corporations. And so you can use them as design partners, right, and work with them together. And then I think if you have them working with you, then they'll intro you to their clients and you can work together there, right? So you can do sequencing that way, but sequencing in terms of like this feature, then this feature, then this feature, sometimes you're wrong. Like sometimes it is just easier to get adoption on number 2, even though technically it probably makes more sense to do number 1 first, right? And sometimes you're just wrong. And you have to constantly be paying attention to the different personas, and you have to be willing to pivot.
How do you as a founder keep such a laser focus on aspects of the product and problem you're solving while still having that periphery vision, like the sequencing itself is actually wrong.
Yeah. The number one way to do this is you have to mix the amount of time that you spend with team and customers.
Okay.
You need to do both.
Yeah.
Like, this is just not something that you can do by only spending time with customers and only spending time internally and, like tinkering with the product. Like, you have to do both. Because, sometimes you'll think you're going to develop a feature and there's like a security risk that would make it so that you could actually never, ever develop it this way. And if you haven't asked enough folks about it, you could just spend 4 months building that. And then you go to deploy it and they go, I love this. This is awesome. But you don't have this one thing.
Yeah.
And so we can't deploy it until you get it.
Yeah.
And it's going to take you 3 more months to do that.
Yeah.
Right? Or something like, I'm serious.
Yeah.
And so that's, I think, like the thing that you have to do is like very quickly get an MVP out there, which is nice because it's so fast to build MVPs now, and get, mocks out and stuff like that and just collect feedback immediately.
Yeah. And are you yourself also spending time like on both of those aspects of the internal
100%. Yeah, 100%.
Yeah.
You have to. Otherwise, you don't get a good intuition. Like, I think like one nice thing, and maybe this is about not just on product, but the whole company, is I am definitely a person who like zeroes out Slack every like 30 minutes. And it sounds like it's a lot of work, but it actually isn't. And what I've found is the reason it's not tons of work, and I think this is the same for with customers too, is if you're doing it every single day, all your brain is doing is just doing the delta from yesterday to today. So in other words, like a lot of Slacks that I'm in, it's faster for me to read them because it's like, this is the delta from what was happening yesterday to today.
Right.
And so I only need to read the first 2 sentences and I know what is going on.
You've got the context.
Right. And it's the same with customers, where the biggest mistakes I've ever made has been when I've like not talked to customers for like 3 weeks or something. I've done this a couple times in the state of the company. I don't never do it again. But if you do that, because the market moves so fast and perception and all these things move so fast, you just lose that and you have to do catch up to doing it. And so the better thing is just like constantly being in touch and constantly updating your mental model.
Yeah. I mean, it goes back to what you said earlier. It's like if you spend 4 months building this thing, you haven't done enough customer talks, then actually we need another 3 months to actually build up the product.
Yeah, exactly.
That's
100%. Yeah.
Is a part of the I think it's very interesting the type of company Harvey is and what you're building, because it's so unlike, and correct me if I'm wrong, but like unlike other companies in history where we're at this point in time where you have to be so relentlessly fast and otherwise you're just going to lose.
That's definitely true.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I was going to ask you, is that just the happenstance of where we are and the type of company you're building, or what are your thoughts on that aspect of like, you need to go quick or you're going to just lose?
Yeah. I think you definitely need to go really fast. And I think that the bigger reason you need to go fast is I think that it's very important that you get distribution quickly. And the reason why it's really important that you get distribution quickly is it's hard to get a good sense of what product features are going to work and which ones aren't unless you have just tons of users.
Okay.
Right? The reason why is we aren't building something that like only does patents, right? We're building kind of like a general productivity system for law, right? And even when you probably think of it more as like an operating system over time. And if you're doing that, you need to have a very good sense of like where in the product are people definitely using it, where are people not, and you need a critical mass of this, right? And you need a critical mass of being able to do A/B testing to make sure that your improvements are actually going somewhere. And so I think you need to be very fast with distribution, and you need to be very fast with also shipping, because people are shipping so many features, et cetera, and the models are getting better. Having said that, I think already we're starting to transition to the quality matters more than anything else. And I think that's
more than distribution, more than speed.
More than anything else. And I think it's because we're getting to the point where we're starting to build things that are much more complex and defensible.
Right.
And if you're building things that are much more complex and defensible, it's really important to just get that quality right? And now we have enough feedback loops that when we're building those things, we get enough feedback to figure out how to improve it, right? But if you don't have enough of those feedback loops in the beginning, it has to just be ship as fast as humanly possible, because you just don't have a critical mass of users to actually influence your product roadmap, right? And so my point with all of this is, I think I didn't used to do as much. I did but I always thought like, this is the 10-year plan. This is the 1-year plan. And then everything in between, like, didn't really think about. And maybe I did like, what's today's plan? And now I definitely think way more what is going to happen in 3 months, 6 months, 1 year, 2 year, 3 year. And then 10-year has not changed at all. But I think that mental model is something that you have to do when you start scaling.
Yeah.
Right? Because we're getting to the point where you need to just figure out who are the people, who are the teammates that we need in which position to actually scale in 6 months so you can do X, Y, Z.
Yeah.
Right? And we're just getting to the size of a company where the decisions that you need to make need lead time. And it's because a lot of the product features we're building are like complex collaboration with permissioning and things like that. And you can't just you can't vibe code that really quickly and then just ship it out, right? But in the beginning, a lot more of it was the model was doing the work. And so it's just like, put tons of front end on top of it and like go as fast as possible.
Yeah.
But I think we're transitioning now away from that.
Interesting. So it's again, if I'm hearing you correctly, it's like, again, a sequencing thing where early on, like the distribution part is super important. So you have to go very quick so you can get that. And then once you have the distribution where you're at now, where you've hopefully hit a critical mass, you have to focus much more on the quality and thinking out 6 to 12 months.
Well, and I'll give you a good example of this. We're getting to the point where we've had some customers say, stop shipping so many things.
Really?
Yeah, I'm serious. And part of that is just because like you get like testing fatigue and things like that. Part of that is because you ship a bunch of these things and they're like, oh, actually all I want is this one feature that is just like, I love this feature. I spend all day doing this feature. Can you just make this infinitely better, right? And I think that anxiety goes away a little bit of like, we got to win the next deal, got to win the next deal, got to win the next deal.
Yeah.
To where you shift to a mental model of, and I know it should always be the case, but sometimes you have to do both. You switch to a mental model of how do we make it so that this user experience is as good as possible? And this idea of like, I need to try the new shiny AI tool, I need to try the new shiny AI tool, that age seems to be kind of over. Or
for any stage of company.
It's starting to be a little bit more over. And I think it's mostly because it just depends on the vertical, but it's getting more saturated with a bunch of different tools and a bunch of different players. And really what these folks are starting to look for is, what is the quality? Like, are you delivering on this?
Yeah.
Like, my number one metric at all times is DAU over MAU and hours spent.
Yeah.
Like, that is what I care about, right? And that doesn't necessarily always correlate to what are the features that win you that next deal, right? Sometimes the thing that wins you the next deal is some shiny demo of something that actually doesn't really work, right? But I care much more when we have enough users where it's just like, I want all of our users, I want the retention to be incredible, I want their usage to go to the moon, right? Like, that's what I want. And I think it's just an interesting balance of, you have to sprint to market sometimes, and you have to balance, what do we build quickly to win like more market share versus what are we building that is just perfect, really good quality and hard bets over time because we already have the market share, right? And right now we're still both, like it's both. But I think in the beginning it was a little bit more like ship. And now we're moving a little bit more to like, what are our long-term bets? And how do we make sure that for those long-term bets, we really nail them as much as humanly possible. And there's, as best quality as possible in the product.
Well, what frameworks do you have internally as a leadership team or as a founder to structure the team or plan out to make sure that you're focusing both on the retention aspect and also these long-term bets?
I mean, we're still the size of the company where wherever the founders focus, it feels like the company thinks that's important. And so I think the number one step, and hopefully that's always the case.
Right.
But the number one step is you as a founder need to spend more time on it.
Right.
Like that is the number one way to do this. Like there's so many things about how you organize your org and do all these different things. And we have like quality groups, we have like customer delight groups that are just doing XYZ to make sure that the experience from one product suite to the other is really good. And all that's great. And I think there are some really good ways to do it. But the number one switch is if you yourself as a founder say, this is how we are going to do these product releases. This is where I am going to spend my time.
Mm-hmm.
This is where I'm going to communicate to the team.
Right.
That changes culture, that changes focus more than anything else. More than anything else. And hopefully that stays the same. I'm very involved. And so that changes a lot of stuff. And hopefully when you keep scaling it keeps going. Yeah.
You just said you're involved in a lot of stuff. I think
Definitely involved.
I read somewhere, and correct me if I'm wrong, that you don't think you should outsource or delegate a role unless the founder has been in it for
Correct.
3, 6, 12 months.
Yes.
Can you talk to me a little bit about that, and then also how you manage that balance right now as you are trying to scale?
I don't think it's necessarily like 3, 6, 12, etc. I do think that you need to be in that role for a certain amount of time.
Okay.
And there's some roles like maybe you don't. Like I don't need to be the general counsel probably. Although I'd be the only one of the only founders that could be, I guess. But I think that the way this becomes a problem is, hiring is the number one most important thing at the company right now. And it's always been, but it becomes it goes from you're spending 50% of your time doing it because you're trying to find product market fit, and a lot of it's hiring, a lot of it's doing that, a lot of it's talking to customers, and you transition. I mean, I don't know, everyone I've talked to transitions to this where hiring is just like 70% of the job. And when I say hiring, by the way, I mean retention too. Like it's like, I think of hiring also as retention. Like how much time are you spending thinking about your internal org, where they need to scale, where they will be able to, where they probably won't, and what resources they need, and like mentorship. And maybe that's not me. A lot of time it's not me. It's bring in somebody else or someone else from the team, right? But I think that if you are focused on that at all times, this stuff just gets much better over time. Yeah.
If you're focused on hiring.
Yeah, I mean, that's like the number one way. Yeah.
That's interesting. I like, talk to me about this.
The Biography podcast is presented by Ro, the all-in-one banking platform for startups. Thousands of startups like Perplexity, Product Hunt, and more use Ro. You get everything you need to manage your startup's cash. Fast banking setup, cards with up to 2% cash back, and yield that turns company cash into extra runway. All super important in the early days of launching. But the thing founders really love about Ro is their team. They are obsessed with helping founders disrupt the status quo and will go to the end of the earth to help them to do so. And exclusively for Biography podcast listeners and viewers, you'll get a $1,500 statement credit plus a ton of exclusive perks when you manage your company's cash with Ro. To learn more, visit rho.co/biography. Terms and conditions apply. Ro is a fintech, not a bank. Checking and card services are provided by Webster Bank, member FDIC. See rewards terms for details.
This goes back to why I think you have to do these roles for a little bit. Is like I have no startup experience before this, like zero.
You didn't even want to start a startup, right? Or...
No, I didn't. Not that, but I definitely didn't have startup experience before this.
Right.
And so I didn't know what to look for, and I think I've been decent at just being, saying this person is good, or this person's intelligent, this person's hardworking, this person cares, right? This person's hungry. But in terms of what does a good chief business officer look like? What does a good CTO look like, et cetera? What does a good product leader look like? I didn't have that experience. I didn't work in a startup. I didn't know. And so I think that being a founder who has, not saying I've done a great job, but been in every single role, and I have definitely spent a lot of time leading product, basically very, very, very in the weeds on that. I've spent a lot of time doing GTM. I was basically the only sales rep for a very, very long time in the company. Marketing, comms, like all of these things at some point I have mostly been running. Not now, to be clear. And I do think that it has made it so that the folks that I've hired in those roles are really good hires. And there are people on our leadership team right now that I could see working with for the next 10 years.
That's amazing. That's beautiful.
And that's not always how it is, right?
Yeah.
I really feel that. And also not just on the leadership team, like on other roles too. I really feel that way. And I think that if you don't spend time in these roles, you don't have a good sense of, what it needs.
And what high quality looks like.
Yeah. And the counter to that is we maybe were a little slow on hiring some of these roles, to be 100% honest. Like, I think we had some scaling problems that we would have avoided this year if we would have hired some of these roles earlier. But at the end of the day, I'm happy we waited because I think we picked the right person.
Right.
So.
You probably would have gone even slower if you had to then make a change.
I think that's right.
I want to ask you one more question then, and I want to get a little bit to funding.
Yeah.
When you're putting yourself in these roles, when you're the sales rep, when you're when you're leading product, at one point as you're going through that scaling, do you realize, okay, now is the time to let go of the rope?
Yeah. So the best way to do it, like the sense that I start getting is there are just better people at this particular thing than me.
Okay.
Like, in other words, so like sales is a good example. You just get to a stage where some of the calls you're taking, you don't need to give like the entire company vision for that call.
Right.
Once you get there, hire a sales rep immediately, right? Like, and you'll feel it, like you feel it as a company of like, yeah, people know enough about us. People kind of get what the goal of the company is. I don't really need to do that.
Yeah.
It's more just straight up product demo and talking about features and things like that. The instant you feel that way, it's like there are people, really good people that could do that, right? And so you hire that, start hiring.
Okay.
I think it's the same with product in the sense of I still like genuinely make most of the high level product decisions. I mean, we make it as a group, right? But I'm insanely involved.
Yeah.
Insanely involved. Am I involved in every single UI decision in one of our 10 different workflows? No, right? And so once your product gets to a point where you know it so well, it's kind of like the Slack zeroing out, actually. When you start to feel like you're fast, you can review everything and hold all of the context in your head, you can start delegating.
Right.
Yeah. Where like there isn't a single part of our product that I don't know about. Like I know the status of every single piece of our product. Does that mean that I designed every single UI component for it and approved it? No. Right. But it's the same thing as Slack, where it's like, I know what's going on in every single one of those Slack channels. Can I recite verbatim what the Slack is or what the status is on that product feature launch, et cetera? Sometimes not, right? And at that point, I think you want to delegate. But if you don't do that, it does feel like your brain doesn't get to the point where you can hold all the context of the company together at the same time. And then it seems like you can fall into decision paralysis. Because to me, like the reason, if I'm ever slow to make decisions, it's because I don't have enough context. And if I'm absorbing context 24/7, you can make super fast decisions. I'm not saying they're right. I'm just saying I can make them quickly, at least.
Right.
Yeah. Like my gut is really strong because it's not a gut. It's informed by just reading everything.
You've seen what everyone else has said.
I know what's going
on. Debates.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. That's so interesting that you're sort of getting this. Yeah, interesting. Take me to July 4th.
Yeah.
What happened on July 4th, and then talk to me a little bit about, as you've hit these scaling problems, like, how you've gone about fundraising.
Is this July 4th of last year?
No, when you were pitching OpenAI.
Oh, okay, yeah.
But I want to hear about last year as well now.
Last year, I don't know what happened on July 4th of last year.
Probably working.
Yeah, I don't remember that. So basically what happened was my co-founder and I, we got a bunch of, we were doing chain of thought prompting basically before this is like a thing. And we were doing it on, with GPT-3, which was released to the public in like early 2022. There's a 2021 version, and then there was an update in 2022, which also had, I don't remember if the API was in 2021 or 2022, but you had the API and there was an update to the quality of the model. Some instruction following on top. That's what the main thing was. They had instruction following. And we were using it. We came up with this chain of thought prompt that basically was based off of landlord-tenant safety security deposit boxes. And it basically was like a rule set, like a guide. It was, if this fact pattern, then go to this code section. If this, then under that, it's a decision tree, right? And And we came up with a super complicated prompt, and we ran it. We went on r/legal advice, which is basically it's people just asking like random questions. It always ends in like, who can I sue? Every single question. I've never seen a question not end in who's liable, who do I sue? And we got a bunch of landlord-tenant questions, and we got 100 of them, and we ran this chain of thought prompt over it. And we gave it to 3 landlord-tenant attorneys, and we just said, based off of this question from a customer or client and this answer, would you send this answer to the client that asked about this? No edits, just would you send it? And 2 out of 3 at least on 86 of the 100 questions said yes, no edits. And we grabbed those, and my co-founder actually just cold emailed Jason Kwan and Sam Altman. And Jason Kwan at the time, I think he's a chief strategy officer now, but he's a general counsel at the time, an incredible lawyer. And we thought you definitely had to email a lawyer because they have to see the output. Like, you can't tell, right?
Right.
And he got on a call with my co-founder, and we kind of started talking about the pitch, and then we did a final pitch, or we did a secondary pitch on July 4th. And they asked us to get on a call. I think it was like 10 a.m. Pacific time, or maybe 11 or something like that on July 4th. And Gabe, my co-founder, and I were like, I think we're going to like these guys. And yeah, we pitched the company to them. And the original pitch was a little different. We had a little bit more of, we might try to do some of these like consumer areas. And I mean, to be honest, the main reason was just because GPT-3 was not capable of doing super complex legal work, right? And the reasoning ability of it wasn't even there. So it wasn't just like, oh, get the right context and, do a lot of post-training. It wouldn't have gotten there. Yeah. And we pitched them that, and we raised, and then, pretty soon after, GPT-4 came out. And all of a sudden, our company roadmap just changed because, I remember I think I went into my room and I tried to basically do a bunch of the work that I had done when I was a lawyer at O'Melveny and couldn't get GPT-3 to do. And all of a sudden I was like, wait a second, these outputs are like very good.
Yeah.
Like, this is pretty close to like the research assignment or like the summary that I wrote myself, right? Not saying that's good, but at least
but that's similar.
At least it was enough for a first year associate. And we basically, grabbed that, and we started saying, oh, wait, we can actually do, this really complex work. And that really was kind of the aha moment for us.
Yeah. That's beautiful. If people want to learn more about Harvey or want to join Harvey, where should they go?
Oh, I mean, definitely our website, for sure. We're also recruiting like crazy.
Yeah.
And you can directly email me if you're interested. I mean, I get a lot of those requests, and I read all of them. So, awesome. Cold email is incredibly important for us. So I think you got to pay it back.